The outgoing governor of Puerto Rico has named his successor. Human rights activists and journalists in Honduras face great insecurity. And a new survey in the U.S. reveals more than half of the population believe that President Trump is a racist. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Outgoing Puerto Rican Governor Ricardo Rosselló has named Pedro Pierluisi as the island's new Secretary of State. He took his oath of office on Wednesday and is expected that a special session of the House of Representatives will be called on Thursday to debate his appointment, as he needs approval from both the House and the Senate. Pedro Pierluisi was Puerto Rico's representative in Washington between 2007 and 2019, during which time his family's wealth grew enormously. For his part, Ricardo Rosselló was forced to announce his resignation, scheduled for Friday, after over a protest demanding his exit over leaked racist, homophobic, and sexist messages. But on Wednesday, a new round of transcripts of chat messages involving the outgoing governor and senior members of his administration were leaked. Moving on, during a news conference, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez condemned the attempts of Canadian gold mining company Cristalex of illegally expropriating Citgo assets, labeling it as organized crime requested by Washington and an opposition ploy. Cristalex alleges the assets would be payment for an alleged debt Venezuela holds with the company, despite the fact that the government has not given Cristalex any mining rights within its territory.
People who are part of the Voluntad Popular Group, which is no longer even a political party, as they have been responsible for terrorist acts, have most recently been trying to illegally seize control of Venezuelan assets abroad. Those are acts of organized crime in accordance with the desires of the government of the United States. We discovered this information thanks to a chat between Roberto Marrero and Juan Guaido, where they plot to illegally seize control of Citgo in the U.S. This is an international operation to steal the assets of Venezuela.
Vice President Rodriguez also spoke about Washington's expectations of opposition figure Juan Guaido, saying he is simply being used to steal assets belonging to the Venezuelan people.
I direct this to Juan Guaido and to his brother, who is also a thief. The U.S. Department of State says that you are a nobody, that you were not able to fight against President Maduro and the people of Venezuela. But they do recognize your qualities as a thief, because that is what they are using him for, to steal the assets of the people of Venezuela.
The Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro welcomed members of the Embassy Protection Collective at the Miraflores Palace on Tuesday night. The activists from the United States went to Caracas to take part in the Sao Paulo Forum, which ended in the weekend. The collective, which includes the movements Code Pink and Answer Coalition, defended the Venezuelan embassy in Washington for several weeks in April against attempts by the Venezuelan opposition to occupy it. They were finally evicted in an illegal operation by the U.S. police. President Maduro and his foreign minister thanked them for their brave defense of international law.
We also send our warmest greetings to those members of the Embassy Protection Collective in Washington who couldn't be with us tonight, especially the 4 comrades who are facing charges and possible prison sentences or high fines, just because they defended Venezuela, defended peace and the unity of our peoples. We continue to fight together, coordinating, and sooner or later we will see, as President Salvador Allende of Chile once said, big changes, broad avenues that will open up for the people of the United States as well. Thank you very much. Long live the unity of the people of the United States and the people of Venezuela.
Over 100 human rights activists, journalists, and government workers in Honduras protested against the failures of a mechanism by the government meant to protect them. They say it puts their lives in danger instead of helping them.
A system to protect the lives of human rights defenders, government workers, and journalists was created by the Honduran state, thanks to international pressure and due to the vulnerability of these groups. However, until now, it has failed to carry out its duties, according to a recent survey.
The people who answered the survey are well-known activists and journalists, and they not only gave their testimonies and their experience, but they also provided advice on how to improve the government's approach.
More than 60 journalists have been murdered in Honduras in less than 10 years, while 150 environmental activists died in the same period. Although the state created a protection mechanism for victims, the danger is even worse.
I can go to Choluteca, because if I go there and want to broadcast something, let's say a protest or any other activity, through Facebook Live, the police will come and will throw tear gas bombs at us. They will chase after me on their cars and motorcycles.
Those who are threatened also say that people from the protection mechanism justify their actions by saying they don't have enough funds to deal with security issues, so the situation turns even worse.
Very little of the budget reaches the beneficiaries, who are supposed to be human rights activists or persecuted and victimized people. I think that the mechanism needs to be reviewed in depth.
Most of those who've been affected have received threats after they reported corruption cases within the government, or for opposing the delivery of indigenous land to private projects without any consultation, among other cases.
The reason why they threaten us is because we are protecting the Petacon River, where the hydroelectric power plant is located. I could make the Honduran state responsible for the threats we receive, since the only protection they provide for us is sending police patrols.
Criminalization and persecution of those who protest against the government have increased since Juan Orlando Hernandez took power, in particular after the 2017 elections, when he was accused of electoral fraud.
And now let's go back to Puerto Rico to talk more about the current political situation in the island. We are joined live by Heriberto Martinez. He's the incoming president of the Association of Economists in Puerto Rico. Thank you so much for your time, Heriberto.
Thank you for the opportunity. Hi from San Juan, Puerto Rico.
In your opinion, why did Rosselló appoint his political rival as his successor?
Because he's looking for a relaxed transition from the former to new Secretary of the State, Pedro Pierluisi, and because right now the political chessboard in Puerto Rico is extremely complicated. Why? Because we have two different ideologies inside the ruling political party in Puerto Rico, the New Progressive Party, in which we have the President of the Senate, Tomás Rivera Chat, who is far right, and Pedro Pierluisi, who is more center right. So right now they're fighting for power, and the political chessboard inside the ruling government is extremely hard. So that's why former Governor Ricardo Rosselló is choosing his ex-rival Pedro Pierluisi for the position of Secretary of the State and probably future Governor of Puerto Rico.
Explain to our viewers who Pedro Pierluisi is and what does the opposition think about this new appointment?
Pedro Pierluisi is our former resident commissioner. He was the representative of the Puerto Ricans in the USA Congress. Remember, we are a U.S. territory, we are a U.S. colony, so we don't have representation with voice and vote inside the U.S. government. So the only position, the only representative position that we have right now in Congress is the resident commissioner. So Pedro Pierluisi was is our former resident commissioner, but right now he's an extremely powerful person because he's the main lobbyist of a lot of foreign companies in Puerto Rico, like for example, energy companies, waste companies. So right now he's a very powerful person and is extremely related to the corporate world and not to the social or citizens world. He's extremely he's part of this oligarchy in Puerto Rico who use the government for personal and family enrichment, and I think is not the best candidate to be the governor of Puerto Rico.
And Heriberto, thus far, what have you seen or heard on these new leaked chats which were released today?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? We are having powers in Puerto Rico right now with the energy, so maybe the connection is a little bit slow. So if you can please repeat the question.
Have you heard anything new about these new leaked chats that were released today, just today?
No, right now we don't have enough information. We have a lot of rumors in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, but we don't have enough official information to know what is happening in the island right now and what is happening inside the government. And what is worse, right now we have energy power, but from 3 hours ago until now, the energy power in some parts of Puerto Rico was gone. So what is happening right now? We have a political crisis and we don't have enough information about who will be the next governor and what is happening inside the government structures.
Heriberto, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English and for this important update.
Thank you for the opportunity, and again, from San Juan, Puerto Rico, to todo Latinoamérica. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Heriberto. We have been speaking with Heriberto Martinez from Puerto Rico about the current political... Welcome back to From the South. Members of Brazil Workers' Party and social movement organizers began a resistance caravan in the country's northeast in order to defend democracy and the sovereignty and rights of workers. Senators are among the group which will travel through the states which they said had a voice, had a time and favorable public policies under President Lula's government. The government at the time worked with movements, agrarian reform struggles, and the struggles of Quilombola and indigenous peoples. The caravan is calling for the release of Lula da Silva and denouncing the crimes committed by the government of Jair Bolsonaro against the Brazilian people. And oil workers in Brazil are demonstrating in defense of the state-controlled oil company Petrobras. Union members gathered outside refineries and fertilizer plants in several cities. They are condemning President Jair Bolsonaro's plans to dismantle Petrobras with the sale of 8 of the company's 13 refineries. They also want their collective contract protected. Moving on, Dominica's government plans to bring to Parliament legislation that allows for the regulation of marijuana use in the country. The bill proposes for the herb to be used for medicinal, scientific, religious, and recreational purposes. This was announced by Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarry during his delivery of the 2019-2020 budget.
We recognize the sensitivities of this issue. We are of the view, however, that in all the circumstances, particularly having regard to the empirical data and the growing international importance of medical marijuana, and the world trend of decriminalization of marijuana for medical, religious, and recreational use, that the government should bring to the Parliament for consideration legislation to decriminalize the possession of marijuana.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves says those challenging his country's buggery laws should have their day in court. This came as 2 citizens unknown to each other filed proceedings against the buggery and gross indecency laws which criminalize homosexuality on the island. Dr. Gonsalves says he has no opinion on the matter, but notes he has witnessed the movements by the LGBTQ community as they fight for equality and the freedom to have consensual sex among adults.
From the ethos of integration.
The African community in Trinidad and Tobago will be celebrating Emancipation Day on Thursday. In 1985, Trinidad and Tobago became the first country in the world to commemorate the day in 1834 when slavery was abolished. The public holidays marked with street processions, including towering Moko Jumbis in the morning and a Flambouk's Lit Cambolai procession in the evening. Countless events will take place nationwide to celebrate the event. The second patient to be diagnosed with Ebola in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo's Goma City has died. The death comes a day after the case was announced, and health officials say another 15 people have been quarantined in South Kivu, a community that had previously escaped the disease. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has asked the population to be committed in the fight against Ebola.
The role of the population is crucial in the fight against the epidemic. Nothing can be done without a committed population, which is why we train people identified by the community to be able to detect suspected cases of Ebola at the community level, but also to undertake preventive interventions. I think that after more than 1,800 deaths, it's extremely important that people look at reality. Today, if we have been able to make progress in Butembo and Catwa, it is because the population has taken ownership of the answer. People who have lost family members will never say that Ebola does not exist.
Protesters in Sudan marched on the streets of Al Obeid, where a number of students were shot dead 2 days ago. The demonstrators gathered at the houses of the murdered students to pay their condolences. The 5 students, who were all teenagers, were protesting against the shortage of bread and an increase to the price of fuel before being killed by allegedly Rouge security forces. Meanwhile, the African Union has strongly condemned killing of the Sudanese students during a press conference in Khartoum. The AU representative, who is mediating talks between protest leaders and the military, also praised the progress being made between the two sides.
The African Union strongly denounces the killing of pupils taking part in a peaceful demonstration. What I would like to tell you is that after the end of the meeting yesterday between the protester leader and generals, the gap between the different sides, or at least between the Joint Committee, has gotten extremely smaller.
And still in Sudan, a court has postponed the corruption case of former President Omar al-Bashir to August 15. It has been reported that Bashir's lawyers asked for the case to be suspended because of his current psychological state following his mother's death 2 days ago. Bashir was arrested soon after the military overthrew him back in April, and in June he was charged for suspected illicit wealth and emergency orders. Protesters have marched in the streets of Monrovia City, Liberia, to demonstrate against alleged corruption and economic mismanagement by the government. The protesters, in the second major rally since thousands gathered on June 7th, are calling on the government to help improve their living conditions. Police fired tear gas to stop the demonstrators from approaching the parliament building. At least 5 people have been arrested. Mozambique's President Filipe Nyusi has agreed to sign a peace agreement with the country's main opposition party. The truce will be signed on Thursday, formally ending military hostilities that have existed for almost 3 decades. Both parties fought each other for 16 years in a conflict which left about 1 million people dead before a peace accord ended the fighting in 1992. Since then, there have been clashes between the country's security forces and the armed wing. The European Union has agreed to take 116 asylum seekers rescued at sea last week, ending a standoff with Italy over African immigration. The African migrants were repeatedly denied permission to go ashore by Italy's right-wing interior minister. The EU says Germany, France, Portugal, Luxembourg, and Ireland have agreed to take the asylum seekers, meeting a condition set by the interior minister to allow the group to come ashore. An additional group will be received by the country with the support of the Catholic Church. Italy allowed minors and people in bad health to disembark the ship earlier this week. Palestinians have rejected Israel's plan to build 6,000 illegal new homes for Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank. Israel's decision has been criticized as representative of a colonial mentality and an effort to displace Palestinians. Construction in the occupied West Bank has been seen as an appeal to far-right nationalists by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ahead of elections set for September 17th. The announcement comes a week after Israel demolished around 70 Palestinian homes for, according to them, being too close to a segregation wall in the village of Sur Baher.
This is one way in which this Israeli government is trying to legitimize its illegal war crime of building settlement units in Area C. And they're using the very flimsy excuse or pretext that they will enable the Palestinians to build 600 or 700 units on their own land in Area C in exchange for the Israelis building 6,000 settler units in land which doesn't belong to Israel. This land is Palestinian land.
A new survey conducted by Quinnipiac University in the United States has revealed that 51% of U.S. citizens consider President Donald Trump a racist, as evidenced by his policies.
51% of U.S. citizens that were surveyed believe Trump is a racist. 55% of Hispanics living in the U.S. share the same sentiment, while 46% of Caucasian citizens also have the same view. In the case of African American voters, 80% say yes when asked if they consider the president to be racist. These figures are according to the latest survey conducted by the University of Quinnipiac. But the president does not agree.
I am the least racist person there is anywhere in the world.
The study also covers immigration and the policies under the Donald Trump administration. 70% believe that immigration is good for the United States. 51% disagree. 35% believe that conditions in detention centers are inhumane, while 68% oppose this view. Meanwhile, 23% believe that those conditions are a serious problem, and 62% don't. And 29% believe that the federal government is not doing enough to ensure that the facilities are operated in humane conditions, as they are already called concentration camps. But disapproval of Trump's policy doesn't stay in the polls. While the president gave a speech condemning U.S. slavery on the anniversary of the first Legislative Assembly in Virginia, a young man interrupted him.
Right here in Virginia, your predecessors.
You can't send us back. Virginia is our home. Mr. President, you cannot send us back. Virginia is our home.
The young man held up a sign which read, "Return to your corrupt home, deport hate, reunite my family, and all shattered by systematic discrimination." However, Trump continued his speech with references to the contribution of African Americans to U.S. history.
These are people that, in my opinion, hate our country.
Statements that come weeks after he lashed out at 4 congresswomen of color, saying that they should return to the countries they came from.
If they want to leave, they can leave.
Organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center say the rise of hate groups in the United States coincides with the 2016 Trump presidential campaign and later with his presidential term. Santino William, the man responsible for the massive shooting in California on July 28, was spreading supremacist messages, as was Robert Bowers, who was behind the shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 people in October 2018.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.